When you are retouching eyes, there are a lot of different strategies that you can go with. I think that the first realization you need to have is that the point is to create contrast, to attract attention to the eyes. Um, so most of the strategies that we use will kind of revolve around that and trying to bring that sort of attention to that area. We're going to start by mapping out the areas that we're going to create contrast in. Remember that when we're retouching, the point is typically going to be to accentuate areas without drawing attention to the fact that they have been edited. You want to keep your editing subtle so that it's not noticeable. Unless you're turning on and off those edits, then you'd be able to see it. But otherwise, it should look natural. Your goal should be to enhance rather than to add things in to it. So we want to enhance these areas first of all of highlights and shadows to create contrast. So just to show you where I'm going to be doing that, I'm going to map it out a little bit. I'm going to use a brush. We'll use this color. I created a new layer here. And we will use a pretty tiny brush size for this. We don't need it to be big. All right, so we'll start with highlights. We'll use this color for our highlights. So places that we would want to add, and some of these are going to be pretty hard to notice, especially if you're zoomed out in this picture, but it's when all of these little tiny things come together, that's when it really makes a difference. So if we zoom in, there's usually going to be this area in here around the eye. There's sort of this gleam right along that bottom edge. You'll also notice some of those same sort of wet looking gleams in the corners of the eyes. Oops, hard to see the cursor with photopia. And here, there's some here. And then there's the more obvious ones. Above the eye on the top eyelid, right along here. Let's see, on the bottom eyelid, right along, all the way, really, all the way along here, in this area. And it's kind of hard to notice there because you have the eyelashes, but look beneath the eyelashes, kind of back up a little bit from it. It might not necessarily be a highlight, but we can make that a highlight. It's brighter than the other areas. It's not bright, though, yet. And then maybe a little bit underneath the eye here. We don't want to go too far with this because when you're starting to accentuate highlights and shadows beneath the eye, it tends to increase the perception of age there. You get baggier eyes. And then we'll go one large area right here on the brow, because we have our light source is kind of coming in from this direction here and hitting there. For highlights, that looks pretty good. I would also say when we're doing the inner eye and the inner iris, one of the principles here is that, well, usually and especially when you're dealing with photos that were taken for modeling purposes, you're going to find catch lights in the eyes. It's those sort of glares, and those give you an idea of where the light source was. So in this case, the light source was in the top right corner, coming from this direction. So this was our light source. I'm not going to add anything to this, but just to show you and what I'm talking about, that would be the light source. And one of the curious things about these light sources is that when you zoom in on the eye, you'll notice in just about every picture, I haven't seen any examples that counter this, but I don't want to say 100% of the time, you'll notice that on the opposite side of the iris is the colored part of the eye, the opposite side of the iris from where that catch light is typically going to be where the brightest part of the iris itself is, barring the glare itself, of course. But right along in here, you'll notice that this area tends to be the brightest. For whatever reason, I don't know, it's just the optics of the eye. But this area will be brightest, so we're going to accentuate that area as well. All right, and so we'll do this quickly on the other side of the other eye here. Same area on this eye. You'll notice that this the whole eye is pretty dark because it's on the shadowed side of the face, but this area is the brightest, opposite the catch light again. When we do around the eye, we're going to take care of this glare here. You got a little glare here in the corner as well. That will bring out same sort of angle above the eye on the upper eyelid. There. We'll do the brow here. We can see that, you know, there's this large part here that is brighter than the rest. And then underneath the eye, right along the rim, right along the lid of the eye, in here. And a little bit below, along there. All right, so that takes care of our highlights. For shadows, the process tends to be pretty much the same. We'll use a different color for the shadows so that we can differentiate. Press OK. All right, so shadows, there's going to be fewer shadows than highlights. There just tends to be. But they are just as important. I'd say right here along the eyelid. This is an important area to bring out, to darken. And then along the eyelid where the eyelashes are also. Right along here we'll darken that. And once again, remember the point here is to create contrast. Contrast is the difference between your brightest values and your darkest values. So when we increase contrast, it increases the attention that we are drawing to that area. And right along those eyelashes there. All right. That's pretty much what we'll limit our shadows to. We don't want to increase shadows along the corner of the nose. That changes the shape of the face. We don't want to change the shape of the face, not that drastically. And then on the other eye, same area right there. That crease of the eyelid, where the eyelid meets the brow. And then along where the eyelashes are, along the rim of the eye, on top. Right in there. And so we outline this highlight here, but right below that highlight, there's another area, a darker area. We're going to accentuate that area too with shadow. All right, so if we back up, Photopea doesn't work that way. All right. There we go. If we back up, we can see this is our map. Remember, yeah, there's a lot of work that can be done on the entire face, but we're focusing on the eyes for this one. All right, so there's our map. Okay, so moving on from there, let's see how quickly we can work. Let's start with the inner eye, with the iris itself. We want to work non-destructively as much as possible. So I'm going to convert my background to a smart object for now. We gotta wait on Photopea, it's slow. I'm gonna turn off the map for now. I don't really need the map. All right, so now that it's a smart object, I'm going to, I don't typically want to work with my root image. I'm going to create duplicates and copies. I'm going to go to right click on that layer and go to new smart object via copy. This creates an unlinked smart object. If I was to duplicate a smart object, any changes that I make to that new smart object would also apply to the original one. They have this link. We don't want that. So instead of duplicate, we go to new smart object via copy. All right, so once I have that, I'm going to rename this one inner eye, just so it's easy to identify. And we're going to zoom in on that area. All right, so I want to increase the highlights. We talked a little bit in class about the dodge and burn tools. So the dodge tool can increase exposure in an area, and the burn tool can decrease exposure in an area. That means the burn tool darkens, the dodge tool lightens. The problem with using those tools is that they're destructive. It means that if I tried to use it on my smart object, if I tried to use the dodge tool, I would get an error and it says the smart object must be rasterized. Because only raster layers can be edited directly. You can only change the pixels of a raster layer, not of a smart object. There are workarounds for that. So for Photopea, our workaround is to use, on our smart object, we're going to go into image adjustments and we'll use curves to increase our exposure. If we were using Photoshop, instead we would go through filter and then we'd find the camera raw filter in there. It just tends to do a better job, but Photopea doesn't offer that. So we're going to use adjustments and then curves. And there's a lot of ways in here in these programs to change your exposure. Curves is just one of them. It's one of the more versatile ways to do it. You'll notice that because I went through the image menu, it's not creating an adjustment layer. It's applying directly to the layer that we have, but because it's a smart object, it's applying it as a smart filter, so I can always go back and I can change it. It's not a permanent thing. In order to increase exposure with a curves adjustment, I'm going to go to the top right corner here. You'll see a little tiny white point. I'm going to click on it and I'm going to drag it to the left. You'll notice that this is called a histogram. The histogram is divided into quarters. I'm going to drag it 1/4 of the way to the left. I'm going to say that's probably enough. I'm going to hit OK. All right, so now I have my curves adjustment applied to my new layer. I want to choose exactly where I want that curves adjustment to show up. I don't want it to be across the entire picture like it is now. So I'm going to hold the Option key and I'm going to click on my Add Raster Mask. In Photoshop, it's the Add Layer Mask button. When I do that while I'm holding Alt, it creates a black layer mask which hides the entire thing. So now I can go in and with a brush, a small brush, I'm going to turn my flow way down and my opacity way down as well. This lets me layer the marks that I make without, causing a very distinct mark at first. I can layer it up to a point that I like, that I approve of. And I'm going to make sure my brush is soft. And I want to change the size of my brush to be reasonably about the size of the inner iris there, so you can see that. I don't know, it's kind of hard to see, but my brush is about the size of the inner iris now. All right, so now to reveal the increased exposure on this layer in that area, I'm going to use that brush in the area that I want to reveal. I want to make sure that I have white selected. I forgot about that. The shortcut to select black and white for your foreground and background colors once I'm out of my brush panel is D. So you can see I press D and then it changes my color to white. Alright, so now that I've done that, I can start to color in this area. You'll notice I'm on my layer mask. So I'm coloring white on my layer mask and revealing this area. And of course Photopea is very slow, so let it catch up. And keep on going until you feel like you've made something of a difference in that area. You don't want to do the entire iris. Remember, we're working sort of opposite that catch light for this one. And if you're not sure that you're actually making a difference, try turning on and off the layer. You'll see there's a slight difference there. Maybe not enough for my taste. So I'm going to turn up my opacity a little bit and go a little faster with it. We'll notice a bigger difference now. I'm going to go back over it. You want to stay away from the edge, that outer edge of the pupil there. That is very dark. It should stay dark. That's natural. Our eyes have this sort of natural ring around the iris. You don't want to get rid of that. It may not be like something you notice necessarily, but your brain will notice it. And your brain will know there's something weird about that eye. I'm not sure what it is, but something weird. Alright, so let's try that. Let's turn it on and off. Alright, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go back over to the other eye and do the same thing in the same area that we had mapped out before. Opposite the catch light. On the same mask. Alright, that looks pretty good. Again, we're going for a natural look. It doesn't necessarily look like out of place when we're looking at it together afterwards. But if we turn it on and off, we can see we did definitely make a difference. We brightened up that area and it stands out more. The eyes are a little bit more striking. Let's keep on going with other stuff now. All right, so that's the inner eye. There are some other things you can do with this. If you were, for example, maybe you wanted to change the color of the eye. The premise is kind of the same. Well, sort of. Some of the process is the same. You're just going to, you could use a brush, choose a color. I would say a color that's, appropriate to the person's current eye color. Unless your goal is to make them look kind of sci-fi, you want to stick with something natural, remember. That's the name of the game, is keep it natural. So she has brown eyes. I'm going to go somewhere, anywhere in the brown to the sort of amber, I guess, color I'd say would be acceptable. And we'll use something bright. We'll hit OK. You'll see I made a new layer here. I always work on a new layer. And in that same area, let's zoom back in here. I've got my low opacity, low flow brush. I'm going to start coloring in this area. It's going to look unnatural at first, and that's all right. It should, because we're giving her a new eye color. And it's covering some of the texture because it is a solid brush. I'm going to go over and I'm going to do the other eye. We'll fix that in just a second. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now you're going to, with that layer, you're going to change the blending mode of that layer. You can do either overlay or soft light. Either one will work pretty well. I think for the eyes, soft light will do a little bit better. And if you're not sure really what difference you made, then once again, turn the layer on and off, and you can kind of see. All right, so not too big a difference there. If you decide later on, here's kind of the cool thing about it, if you decide later on you want to change the color, with that layer selected, you can go in and to the image adjustments menu and go to hue saturation, and you can vary your hue. You could, if you wanted to, you could create a smart object out of it so that you do it non-destructively. I don't plan on, changing the eye color a bunch of times though, so I'm not too worried about that. But you can see that as I move that, as I shift that, the eyes change color, change hue from purple and red and green and blue. You can make it whatever you like, and you can also play around with the lightness and the saturation of those eyes. But remember, keep it natural. So we'll keep it fairly natural. That looks pretty good. All right, back out. So now if I turn that on and off, a very noticeable difference there, but not if it's on and not turning on and off. All right, and one more thing that you could do, and remember what I said, all of this stuff together makes the difference. Individually, these edits aren't going to do a whole lot. The last thing, well, not the last thing, but the next thing I could do would be to add a little bit of texture to the eye. So for this one, I'm going to make a tiny brush, use a tiny brush, probably like 2 to 3 pixels. It's going to depend on the resolution of your image. I have yellow selected for now. For texture, for accents, I'm going to go actually a little bit sort of like a yellowish green maybe. You don't want to go neon. Don't go neon. That's not yellow green. That's sort of a yellowish green. Let's try it out. All right, so we hit OK. I once again made a new layer. Remember, always on a new layer. And I am going to find my cursor. There I am. Is that me? Yeah, that's me. And I'm going to start coloring in. Undo that. Try again. In this area, right inside the iris. You know what? That's not as noticeable as I want. I'm going to turn my opacity up. If you're not getting the effect that you want, anything that would be noticeable, don't waste your time on it. But go ahead and, change your settings so that you can make it stronger. It's really hard to see my cursor in Photopea. All right, there we go. That's a little better. Noticeable. Weird at the moment. That's okay if it's a little weird. People don't usually have yellowish green stripes in their eyes. But create this texture. If you look at a macro photo of an eyeball or of an iris, you'll notice that we all have this sort of radial texture within our eyes that emanates from the pupil. I'm going to go over and do the same thing for this eye. Once I find my cursor, there it is. Okay. And I'm going to start creating that same sort of scratchy pattern coming from the pupil area. All right. That looks sufficiently weird, but gives us a little more texture in there. I'm going to readjust here so you can see both of them. All right, so to make it a little bit more acceptable, I'm going to change my blending mode again. This time I'll do overlay. That'll keep it somewhat noticeable still. If I turn the layer on and off, you can see I've increased to some extent the texture within those eyes. All right, so that I'm going to group all of these layers together here. Control G groups them into a folder. I'm going to call this one Inner Iris. All right, next we're going to work around the eye. After that, we will, well, I think maybe that's what we'll cover tonight. All right, so new folder, and we're going to do around the eye. Around the eye, we are going to once again duplicate our background layer. So I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to new smart objects via copy. I'm going to drag that up into my new folder, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the curves for the inner eye. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Curves. It's already a smart object. I don't need to make it a smart object again. But remember, that'll make sure that I have a smart filter in case I want to go back later and make it brighter or darker. I could do that. All right, drag it over by a quarter, hit OK. So there's my overexposure. This is what I'm going to use for my non-destructive highlights. I'm going to hold the the Alt key and click on the Add Raster Mask button. Creates a black mask on there. All right, and so the process for this is pretty much the same as we used for creating that highlight within the iris, but this time I'm going to, if I turn on my map, I can see where I had wanted those purple lines, where I wanted to add highlights around the eyes here. But I'm going to change back to a low opacity, low flow brush. The values for this are not exact. Use whatever is going to work for you, whatever works best for you, which you're probably not going to know until you're actually doing it. So play around with them. Feel free to move them up and down and see what gives you the effect that you want. For me, 24 and 18, let's try this. I'm going to definitely need a larger brush though than 2 pixels. Again, you want your brush to be the size of whatever area it is that you're brushing. So get comfortable changing your brush size. In Photopea, I know it's not the easiest thing. If you're using a mouse, the best thing to do is to right click while you're on the brush, and you can change your size there so you don't have to keep on moving back up to the options bar. If you're using a tablet, it's a little bit easier. You can use your shortcuts for your tablet. Alright, so I'm going to press D to make sure pure white is selected for my color. And I'm going to start to bring out these areas. Alright, 24% opacity isn't working for me. I'm going to turn it up. That was not bright enough. Alright, that's pretty good. You don't want to go overboard with it, but you do want there to be some effect. Alright, so I'm going to go over all of these areas where I had circled with the purple or with the pink. I'm going to turn it off for now, actually, so that I can see what I'm doing. Again, it's not going to be super noticeable without turning the layer on and off and on and off and on and off. But you are having an effect here, a cumulative effect. All right, and I've got this highlight along the edge of the eye there, and then all along here, creating contrast. It's probably a little bit too small for that area, so I'm going to increase my brush size. I don't want to get too crazy with it. Maybe that might be a little bit too much. I'm going to go back to black, and I'm going to push that back a little bit. Alright, that's not too bad. A little bit under the eye here. And then for the over the eye portion, I'm going to make sure that this is very, very large. Big, fat, soft brush. Nope, that's too fat. There we go. Let's try that. Alright, again, don't go overboard with it. Back out, take a look at it. Still looks like she has a bright light on that side of her face, but not too bright. All right, let's go to the other eye. Go back, well, make it a little bit smaller. Since we already have the big brush, let's go ahead and do that other eyebrow area here. Okay, and then we'll make it smaller and do the other areas around the eye itself. Too small, still too small. If you use a brush that's too small, you'll tend to be able to see lines. You don't usually want to see the brush marks. So use a brush that's the same, about the same size as the area you're highlighting. It gets really tiny right there, so I'll make my brush really tiny. You can make it a little bigger if you want, but too small is worse. There, there, and right in there. Okay, a little bit larger for beneath the eye, and we have, did I do this? I might have already done this. Right there, along here, and a bit in this area here. All right, we'll back out, well, we'll move it over so you can see both. We'll back out a little bit, and we'll turn it on and off so you can see the difference. Definitely made a difference there. All right, so we're going to do the opposite this time for the shadows. I'm going to, once again, duplicate my background layer. Well, no, not duplicate. New Smart Object via copy. Drag it up into my folder. You don't have to create folders if you don't want to. This is just for your sake, so you can see how I'm organizing this. And then I'm going to do another curves adjustment. Again, it's already a smart object. Don't need to make it a smart object again. This time with my curves, though, instead of brightening it by dragging the top right corner, I'm going to darken it by dragging the bottom left corner. So it's the opposite. I'm going to drag it over by a quarter. How much, I'd say it's up to you. You don't have to go quick. You can see it's pretty intense as far as the change goes, but you be the judge. And I'm going to hold the Option or the Alt key and click on my mask button again. All right, same thing now. If I turn on my map, I can see those blue areas. That's where I'm focusing for my shadows. So I'm going to zoom in over here. We'll start on this side. I'm going to start darkening along those areas. If it's too strong, turn your opacity and flow down a little bit. I tend to leave my flow right where it is, but my opacity, I'll change. Right here along the eyelid where the eyelashes are. And here. There was that highlight. And right below the highlight we have some shadow. Right in there. Good enough for that eye. Other side, same thing. Upper eyelid. Eyelashes. And then lower lashes. Right along there. All right. Let's move over, do a little quick comparison. Zoom out. Move over. There we go. And then turn it on and off so you can see. All right, that looks pretty good. If we turn the entire folder off, we can see highlights and shadows disappear and reappear. All right, that looks good. We've created our contrast with that. All right, so our next goal is going to be to decrease the bags around the eyes. So when we're retouching eyes, typically we want to get rid of signs of stress and age, where it is not too super obvious. So I'm going to keep this within my around the eye folder. To start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. I'm just going to use my brush tool for this. I'm going to make it pretty large. I'm going to be working on under the eye here and around the eye, evening out these tones first. Actually, before I move on to that, I forgot. I should do my healing brush. We'll use the spot healing brush here. We'll try it. Photopea is not the most responsive when it comes to the spot healing brush. We're going to change our source to current and below so that we can heal on this layer but sample from the below layer. Alright, and then we're going to start going in. We're going to try and remove some of these lines, especially right along this edge. That's where it's going to be most noticeable. Yikes, that's a little too strong. Let's make sure that we have a soft brush. That's a problem. We want a soft brush. There we go. Soft brush to blend around it. This is where Photoshop really shines using the healing brush. Photopea slows down a lot, but we'll try it a little bit at least. Again, you're not making huge differences here. You're not making huge changes. There's a somewhat larger wrinkle here underneath the eye. Up to you if you want to get rid of that. You don't have to, but your healing brush can do a pretty good job of it. Or it can do a terrible job. Look at that. That was bad. Alright, we got rid of most of that wrinkle. And get rid of some of this down here. No, it's not doing it. I'm going to leave it at that. Get rid of some of this texture maybe if we can. If you're leaving dark marks where there are no dark marks previously, undo it. You don't want that. The program is not perfect. It makes mistakes, as you guys probably already know. Alright, I'm going to call that good enough for now. If I was in Photoshop and if it was more responsive, I would do more, but it's not, so I won't. Alright, so now that I've got that layer with my healing brush, I can turn it on and off. You can see somewhat of a difference there between the left and right eye. I'm going to make another new layer. This time I'm going to try and even out some of the tones. This is the step where I can get rid of these large shadows under the eyes here, and maybe a little bit too around the eye here. I have noticed that Photopea does not do as well with sampling, correct colors. I hesitate to say correct because really, what does that mean? First of all, before you start brushing, go to your eyedropper tool and change your sample size in the option bar to, I'd say, 5 by 5. This means that instead of sampling some pixel within the area that you click, because usually you can't see the exact pixel that you're selecting, it'll take an average of the sort of 5 by 5 area that you click on. Alright, I'll go back to my brush now. Now remember, with the brush, you can temporarily switch to your eyedropper tool, which selects the current color by holding down the Alt key. So if I hold Alt, I can sample. You can see my color changing in my toolbox there as I sample. Holding the Alt key, I can sample, and then I can let it go, and I can brush. So I'm going to we'll try about a 30%-ish opacity, keep my flow where it is on my new layer here. I'm going to sample from this sort of brighter area, because I want to carry that over this way a little bit. So low opacity, low flow, again, means that I can layer this up without making it too obvious. And I have a soft brush, so that helps too. It helps blend those edges together. I want to make sure that I am also continually sampling. I don't want to do one solid color in here. If this was flat, if we make it look flat, that's not going to look natural. We don't want to make it look flat. We're going to leave some tone difference in there, but we're going to make it a lot less strong. That's our goal. There. Alright, so just to see, if we turn that on and off, you can see we made a big difference there. Alright, I'm also going to go a little bit on this side here. It's not bruised, but it looks a little bit bruised right here along the bridge of the nose. I'm going to sample from this nice bright area right here. I'm going to try and color over that a little bit. Use your judgment to tell you, when you've gone far enough with it. young smart artists, you can figure it out. And I'm doing this with the layer off, that's why there's no change there. Oops. Let's undo that so you can see what I'm doing. Alright, there we go. Now I can see. Resample. That wasn't making any difference. Sample, sample, different areas. Don't get rid of the shadows that you added in here, but I'm going to kind of do this right up to that edge of the eye there. So I've evened out the tone around the eye. It doesn't look convincing because I've also gotten rid of the texture in the process. Before I fix that, and there's definitely a way to fix that, I'm going to go to the other side of the eye and do the same thing over here. We've also got, sort of that baggy area that we can push back a little bit. You don't want to totally get rid of it. It doesn't look real when you totally get rid of it. We all have them. You just want to push it back and tone it back so it's less noticeable. And we can do the same thing. We can kind of reshape a little bit here by changing the shadows there. Alright, let's turn the layer on and off. And you can see that looks pretty good. Alright, I'm going to zoom out. Okay, so this step, there's a much more complicated way to do this. This is the easy way, believe it or not, even though it's like 5 steps long. But let's get started. We want to bring the texture back. So here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to turn off the layer that we were just painting on. We're going to make a new layer now, a new blank layer. And we're going to go up to Image, and then we're going to go to Apply Image. And what this does is it essentially takes all of your visible layers and it merges them down. I want to make sure that layer is copy merged and my blend mode is normal. It merges them all down. It kind of takes a snapshot of your canvas and copies it to this layer. And I'm going to hit OK. So now you can see if I was to turn all the other layers off and leave that one on, it still looks the same. Alright, so now that I have that, I'm going to do a bunch of stuff. So we're going to go to Image, Adjustments. I'm going to desaturate it first, turn it black and white. That would be Control-Shift-U would be the shortcut for that, but we can do it through the Image menu. Then I'm going to make it a Smart Object. I'm going to right-click and go to Convert to Smart Object. You can do this after the desaturate step because we aren't going to need to adjust the desaturation. But we will need to adjust another filter that we applied to it. Alright, now that I've done that, I'm going to go to change my blending mode from normal to vivid light. There. Alright, and then one more sort of secret step. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to change it to a clipping mask. So what this is going to do is it's going to attach itself and apply itself only to the layer that's directly below it. That's what a clipping mask does. Which means that this layer that I just turned off, now my vivid light layer that I just created is only applying to the areas where I've painted and evened out the tone here. So you can see if I turn it on and off, it goes from that, we have that really sort of stark, vivid light only in that area. And we don't want that, that's not the end goal. But now that we have it applying only to the area that we want it to, we're going to do one more step here. We're going to go to Filter, Other, and then High Pass. This is called a high pass filter. So a high pass filter essentially is going to isolate the texture. Because we desaturated it, it's going to take that texture, or it's going to take out all the color, and leave us only the texture on this layer. So that brings our texture back into that area where we colored over, but it'll leave the color that we added to it. So we get the texture and we get the color. As far as the radius goes, you can experiment. For this one, I know that 3 pixels is good. I want to watch this area and make sure that I have my texture back. You can see if I turn it all the way up. That's not all the way. Give it a second. It's thinking about it. It gets pretty ugly again. And if I turn it down too far, I say, no. I think I choked it. This is going to be bad if it crashes on me now. I feel your pain, guys, using this program. I'm so sorry you have to do this. I know I'm on a fast computer versus those school computers. Nope, not working. Alright, looks like I'm going to have to restart. Alright, I'm going to stop the video and we'll pick it up again once I'm back where I need to be. Big bad bag under the eye. Now I'm noticing that it's kind of grayish down here, and that's one of the things that I noticed with Photopea versus Photoshop. When I was dragging, when I was sampling and stuff, it was coming out kind of gray. If that's the case, go back, resample, and see if you can fix it. I wonder if that's an effect of this. Oh, am I choking it again? Oh, it's waiting for me. This, let's see. No, it's still definitely gray. Alright, so maybe I'd go back and I can sample from a different area, and I'm trying to paint on the wrong layer. This one, and see if we can brighten it up. Otherwise, you could try an adjustment to brighten it, or even to increase saturation. That's kind of the opposite of the gray. But I'm honestly not going to spend a lot of time on that at the moment. Alright, I think it actually looks a little bit better. Okay, so I think that pretty much concludes around the eye. We've reduced the wrinkles and the bags around the eye. We've increased contrast around the eye. If we collapse this and turn the entire thing on and off, we've made quite a difference there around the eye. There are a couple more things that you could do to increase interest around the eye. They would include perhaps adding eyelashes, and that's something that's kind of extreme. You might do that if it's like a glamour shot or something like that. You'd probably steer away from it if you are editing a guy, but it is an option, again, to increase contrast around the eye. And the last thing that I would do, and looking at this, you wouldn't think that it needs it, but one more thing we could do would be to increase the sharpness only around the eyes. If we increase sharpness, we could increase it across the entire picture, but that's not going to make the eyes stand out. But if we increase it only around the eyes, it will have that effect. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. One more time, I'm going to make a new layer. It's going to come out outside of my folder, and that's okay. I'm going to make a new layer, and one more time, I'm going to go to Image, and I'm going to apply Image. I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to take that snapshot of my current visible layer, our current visible canvas, and it's going to put it on that layer. Now that I have that, I'm going to do another high pass filter. So I'm going to press Control-Shift-U is my shortcut to desaturate. I'm going to change my blending mode to vivid light, and I'm going to convert to a smart object. The difference here is we're not going to make a clipping mask out of it. It's going to take a second to convert, or several seconds. And I'm going to apply my high pass filter again. I'm going to go to Other, Filter, Other, and then High Pass. Oops, wrong button, cancel. Try again, Filter, Other, High Pass. Alright, and oh, I think I undid my vivid light. That's why it's looking like this. And I'm going to hit OK. For now, I can go back if I need to and edit that, but let's go back undid my vivid light. There we go. So now I can go back to I can double click on my high pass filter again, and we can kind of compare what's happening here. If I turn my radius up just a little bit, watch what happens with the face. Still thinking about it. You can see that the texture of the face begins to stand out a lot more, the detail in the face, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But again, we want to isolate around the eyes for now. So get to a point where you feel like, yeah, the eyes are really, the texture in the eyes is really coming out well. Ooh, that's getting a little extreme maybe. We'll try it though. Let's hit OK. Alright, so now we don't want it across the entire face, so we're going to use that same strategy that we were using around the eye. We're going to create a layer mask. Hold the Option button. Layer mask. Takes all that texture away, and we're going to add it back in only around the eyes. So brush tool, B is your shortcut. Make it, well, we can do about the size of the iris. And we're going to bring, maybe avoid the whites of the eyes. I'm on a hard brush again. Soft brush. Make it nice and pretty. Soft brush, and then bring that texture in within the eye. Get out to that outer edge. And if you feel like it's too strong, remember you can always, you create a smart object here, so you can always go back and you can change that high pass filter and push it back a little bit. Even if it does take Photopea, 2 minutes to figure out what you're doing. I'm going to go along the eyelashes. See, yeah, this is too much. We're going to dial it back a bit. Come out along the eyelashes a little bit too. Along the eyelashes. Just like that. I'm on my pencil tool, that's why it's doing this. Let's go back. I don't believe that. Alright, now I've got my handy dandy brush tool again. Make sure I'm doing something here. Oh yeah, look at the difference between those two. Alright, now I can go back in along the eyelashes. I'm going to go fast as I can, because this video is getting really long. And then, as well as the eyelashes, I'm going to do a little bit of sharpening along the eyebrow here, too. The eyebrow frames the eye and does still help to draw attention to the area. Same thing on the other side. Let's go fast. There we go. The entire iris and pupil. Bring it in nice and strong. And then the eyelashes. Alright, that looks pretty good. I'm going to drag that into, well, I'm not going to. I'm going to highlight all of them and press Ctrl G, put it on one folder so I can turn it all on and off. You can see what we've changed. It looks a lot younger now. A little less battle worn. Alright, so that is all for retouching eyes. I know that took a while. Thanks for hanging in there.